Chapter 1. The Invitation to Dunraven. The autumn rain pattered softly against the windows of Hercule Poirot's London flat, a gentle rhythm that accompanied the meticulous ticking of the ormolu clock on the mantelpiece. The detective, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit with a pristine white shirt and a neatly knotted tie, sat at his desk, his small hands folded over a letter that had arrived that morning. His mustache, waxed to perfection, twitched slightly as his keen grey eyes scanned the elegant handwriting for the third time. "Mon ami," Hastings Poirot called, his voice carrying a note of intrigue, "come regarder this most curious invitation." Captain Arthur Hastings, who had been idly flipping through the Times in an armchair by the fire, looked up with a start. "Invitation, Poirot? Tell me your stet, being dragged to another dreary country weekend. You know how you detest the damp and the lack of central heating." Poirot's eyes twinkled with amusement. "Hastings, you wound me. The damp, it is a small price to pay when the mind, it is tantalized. This letter, it is from a Lady Beatrice Ashford, mistress of Dunraven Manor in Devon. She requests my presence for a weekend gathering. But it is not the invitation itself that intrigues Poirot, it is the tone." Hastings rose, crossing the room to peer over Poirot's shoulder. The letter, written on heavy cream paper, embossed with the Ashford crest, read, "My dear Monsieur Poirot, your reputation as a gentleman of unparalleled discernment precedes you. I am hosting a small gathering at Dunraven Manor this coming weekend, and it would do us great honor to have you among our guests. Certain matters of a delicate nature may require your unique insight, though I hesitate to burden you prematurely. Pray join us for what promises to be an enlightening occasion. Yours sincerely, Lady Beatrice Ashford." Hastings frowned, scratching his chin. "Delicate matters. Sounds like she sits expecting trouble. Why else would she invite a detective like you to a social affair?" "Précisément," Poirot replied, tapping the letter with a manicured finger. "Lady Ashford, she does not say what these matters are, yet she implies they are of consequence. This, Hastings, is the bait that lures the little grey cells into action. And Dunraven Manor, mon Dieu, the name, it evokes the Gothic, the mysterious, does it not?" Hastings chuckled. "You sit already spinning a mystery out of a weekend party. Perhaps she just wants the prestige of having the famous Hercule Poirot at her table." Poirot shook his head, his expression grave. "Non. Hastings, the intuition of Poirot, it is never mistaken. There is something afoot, something that Lady Ashford fears to name. I shall accept this invitation, and you, my friend, shall accompany me." "Me?" Hastings spluttered. "But I st've got plans golf at the club, you know." "Pah! Golf!" Poirot waved a dismissive hand. "The little white ball, it will wait. But a mystery, Hastings, it does not. Pack your valise. We depart for Devon tomorrow." The journey to Dunraven Manor was as picturesque as it was arduous. The train from London to Exeter chugged through rolling hills cloaked in autumnal hues of amber and crimson, but the final leg, a hired motor car winding along narrow, mist-shrouded lanes, tested even Poirot's composure. The manor itself loomed at the end of a gravel drive, a sprawling Elizabethan pile of grey stone, its turrets piercing the low clouds. Ivy clung to its walls, and the windows glowed faintly, as though reluctant to reveal the secrets within. As the motor car crunched to a halt, Poirot adjusted his Homburg hat and stepped out, his patent leather shoes gleaming despite the drizzle. Magnifique, he murmured, though whether he referred to the manor's grandeur or its ominous air, Hastings could not tell. A butler, stern-faced and clad in impeccable black, greeted them at the door. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," he intoned, his voice as crisp as the starched collar at his throat. "Lady Ashford awaits you in the drawing-room." They were led through a cavernous hall adorned with ancestral portraits, their eyes seeming to follow the newcomers. The air smelled of polished wood and old secrets. In the drawing-room, a fire crackled, casting shadows across a gathering of guests who turned to regard the new arrivals. Lady Beatrice Ashford, a statuesque woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and piercing blue eyes, rose from a velvet settee. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice warm yet tinged with urgency, "how good of you to come. And Captain Hastings, a pleasure." Poirot bowed, his moustache quivering with polite deference. "Ah, madam, the honor is mine. Your invitation. It was most compelling." Lady Beatrice's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she recovered swiftly, gesturing to the others. "Allow me to introduce our little party." She presented a cast, as varied as any Poirot had encountered. Sir Reginald Ashford, her husband, a ruddy-faced baronet with a booming laugh and a penchant for whisky. Miss Clara Wentworth, a sharp-eyed young heiress with a sardonic wit. Dr. Alistair Graham, a reserved physician with a nervous habit of adjusting his spectacles. Mrs. Evelyn Marlowe, a glamorous widow whose diamond earrings sparkled as brightly as her guarded smile, and Mr. Victor Crane, a dour solicitor clutching a leather portfolio as if it held state secrets. As introductions concluded, Lady Beatrice Sist's gaze lingered on Poirot. "I trust you still find Dunraven to your liking, Monsieur Poirot. We are a quiet household, but not without our complexities." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Complexity, madam, is the canvas upon which Hercule Poirot paints the truth." Hastings, standing by the fire, suppressed a grin. The weekend had barely begun, and already Poirot's little grey cells were humming. But as the wind howled outside and the fire cast flickering shadows, Hastings felt a chill that had little to do with the weather. Something was indeed afoot at Dunraven Manor, and it was not merely the promise of a good dinner. Chapter 2. Arrival at the Manor. The heavy oak doors of Dunraven Manor closed behind Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings with a resonant thud, sealing them into the cavernous embrace of the house. The butler, who had introduced himself as Mr. Grayson, led them through the great hall, his footsteps echoing on the polished stone floor. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax and age, and the flickering light from wall sconces cast long shadows that danced across the tapestries. "Mon Dieu, Hastings," Poirot murmured, his eyes darting to the high vaulted ceiling where cobwebs clung stubbornly to the corners. "This manor, it is a place of secrets, is it not? The very walls, they whisper." Hastings, clutching his overcoat against the chill, gave a wry smile. "Eustace, letting your imagination run wild, Poirot. It's just an old house, at creaky floors and draughty corridors, hardly sinister." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Imagination, Hastings? Non. It is observation. The house. It speaks to those who listen. And Poirot, he listens always." They were shown to their rooms on the second floor, a pair of adjoining chambers overlooking the mist-shrouded moors. Poirot's room was a study in faded grandeur, a four-poster bed draped in crimson velvet, a mahogany writing desk, and a window that rattled ominously in its frame. He paused to inspect a tarnished silver candelabra, noting a faint scratch on its base. "Curieux," he muttered, filing the detail away. After unpacking Poirot with his usual meticulous care, arranging his toiletries with the precision of a general marshalling troops, they descended to the drawing-room where the other guests had gathered for pre-dinner drinks. The room was a warm contrast to the chill of the corridors, its fire roaring and its walls lined with bookshelves that sagged under the weight of leather-bound tomes. "Ivertu and Neger Obitske, Deviadar." Lady Beatrice Ashford stood near the hearth, her silk gown shimmering in the firelight. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, do join us," she called, her voice gracious but tinged with a nervous edge. "A sherry, perhaps, or something stronger?" "Sherry, madam, will suffice," Poirot replied, accepting a crystal glass with a small bow. Hastings, less restrained, opted for a whisky and soda, joining Sir Reginald Ashford by a window where the baronet was expounding on the virtues of his hunting dogs. "Fine beasts, Captain," Sir Reginald boomed, his face flushed from either the fire or the whisky. "Loyal to a fault, unlike some people, eh?" His laugh was loud, but his eyes flicked toward his wife, who was engaged in conversation with Miss Clara Wentworth. Clara, the young heiress, lounged on a chaise, her bobbed hair gleaming like polished jet. She held a cigarette in a long holder, her eyes narrowing as she addressed Lady Beatrice. "You must find it exhausting, keeping this mausoleum running. All these portraits glaring down. Don't they ever make you feel watched?" Lady Beatrice's sister's smile was tight. "One grows accustomed to the weight of history, Miss Wentworth. Dunraven has stood for centuries, and it will stand for centuries more." "Unless it crumbles first," Clara quipped, exhaling a plume of smoke. "Or, unless someone burns it down for the insurance." The room stilled for a moment, the crackle of the fire suddenly loud. Dr. Alistair Graham, standing near a bookcase, adjusted his spectacles and cleared his throat. "Now, Clara, that sit's hardly fair. Dunraven is a treasure, not a liability." Mrs. Evelyn Marlowe, the glamorous widow, laughed softly, her diamond earrings catching the light. "Oh, Dr. Graham, you sit too serious." "Clara sits only teasing." "Sit you, dear?" Clara Sip's lips curled, but she said nothing, her gaze sliding to Mr. Victor Crane, the solicitor, who stood apart, clutching his portfolio like a shield. "What do you think, Mr. Crane?" she asked, her tone mocking. "Is Dunraven worth saving, or should we all flee before the ghosts get us?" Cranestedt's thin lips pressed into a line. "Ghosts are nonsense," he said curtly, "but value that depends on what one is willing to pay for it." Poirot, sipping his sherry, observed the exchange with keen interest. The little grey cells, they were already at work, cataloguing the undercurrents of hostility, the guarded glances, the words left unsaid. He noted how Lady Beatrice's fingers tightened around her glass when Clara spoke, how Sir Reginald's joviality seemed forced, how Dr. Graham's nervous tics betrayed more than professional detachment. "Dinner is served," Grayson announced from the doorway, breaking the tension. The guests filed into the dining room, a grand space dominated by a long oak table set with silver and crystal. The chandelier above glittered, but its light did little to dispel the shadows lurking in the corners. As they took their seats, Poirot leaned toward Hastings and whispered, "Mark this, my friend. The stage is set, the players assembled, but who, I wonder, is the director of this little drama?" Hastings, already distracted by the aroma of roasted pheasant, merely shrugged. Let's hope it's a comedy, not a tragedy. Poirot Sit's eyes gleamed. With Hercule Poirot present, Hastings, it is never merely a comedy. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows as if the manor itself were restless, waiting for the first act to unfold. Chapter 3. The First Dinner. The dining room of Dunraven Manor glowed under the chandelier's golden light, its crystal prisms scattering flecks of brilliance across the polished oak table. The air was heavy, with the scent of roasted pheasant, glazed carrots, and a rich claret that shimmered in the guests' glasses. Yet, despite the opulence, an undercurrent of unease rippled through the room, as though the very walls anticipated something sinister. Hercule Poirot, seated to the right of Lady Beatrice Ashford, surveyed the table with the precision of a watchmaker. His small, neat hands rested lightly on the silver cutlery, but his grey eyes darted from face to face, cataloguing every gesture, every glance. Captain Hastings, opposite him, was already engrossed in his meal, blissfully unaware of the tension Poirot sensed. Lady Beatrice, at the head of the table, raised her glass with a practised smile. "To our guests," she said, her voice clear but strained, "and to a weekend of harmony and good company." "Hear, hear," boomed Sir Reginald from the opposite end, his ruddy cheeks glowing as he lifted his glass. "Though harmony's a tall order with this lot, eh?" His laugh was hearty, but it faltered when he caught his wife's sharp glance. Miss Clora Wentworth, seated beside Hastings, smirked, swirling her wine. "Harmony, Lady Beatrice, you stir an optimist. Dunraven feels more like a stage for melodrama than a haven of peace." "Clora, really," said Mrs. Evelyn Marlowe, her tone light, but her diamond earrings glinting with a warning. "Must you always be so provocative? Some of us prefer civility at dinner." Clora's eyes sparkled with mischief. "Civility, Evelyn. That's just a mask for secrets. And this house is brimming with them, isn't it?" She glanced at Mr. Victor Crane, who sat rigidly across from her, his fork paused mid-air. The solicitor's thin face tightened. "Miss Wentworth, I suggest you mind your words. Not every secret is yours to prod at." Poirot Sit's moustache twitched, his interest piqued. "Secrets, Monsieur Crane." An intriguing choice of phrase. In the experience of Hercule Poirot, secrets at a dinner table are like crumbs. They always lead to something larger. Crane flushed, returning to his pheasant with undue focus. Dr. Alistair Graham, seated beside him, adjusted his spectacles nervously. "Surely, Monsieur Poirot, you don't mean to imply anything untoward. We sit to merely a gathering of friends and acquaintances." "Friends, Doctor." Poirot Sit's voice was velvet, but his eyes were sharp. "Yet I observe a certain friction. It is most curious, none." Lady Beatrice interjected, her tone brisk. "Monsieur Poirot, you must forgive our little tensions. Old houses breed old grudges, and Dunraven is no exception. But let us speak of lighter things. Captain Hastings, tell us of your travels." Hastings caught mid-bite, swallowed hastily. "Oh well, nothing too thrilling, I'm afraid. Just back from a spot of fishing in Scotland. Lovely country, though the midges are a menace." Sir Reginald guffawed. "Midges? You should try hunting boar in the Black Forest, Captain. That sip's a proper challenge." As the conversation turned to safer topics, Poirot's attention lingered on the guests' interactions. He noted how Lady Beatrice's hand trembled slightly when she reached for her glass, how Clara's sharp gaze flicked towards Sir Reginald with something akin to contempt, how Mrs. Marlowe's laughter seemed rehearsed. Dr. Graham, meanwhile, kept glancing at a pocket watch he tucked away quickly, as if anxious about time itself. And Crane's fingers never strayed far from his leather portfolio, which rested beside his plate like a silent sentinel. The meal progressed through courses: velouté soup, a delicate fish course, and a towering soufflé, but the atmosphere grew heavier with each passing minute. Poirot, ever the observer, caught a whispered exchange between Sir Reginald and his wife as the dessert plates were cleared. "Beatrice, must we discuss it now?" Sir Reginald muttered, his voice low but audible to Poirot's trained ear. "Not now," Lady Beatrice hissed, her eyes darting to the guests. "But it cannot wait forever, Reginald." Poirot filed this away, his mind already weaving a tapestry of motives. He turned to Mrs. Marlowe, who was recounting a tale of her late husband Stack's travels in Cairo. "Madame, you speak of Egypt with such fondness. Did your husband perhaps bring back treasures from his journeys?" Her smile faltered. "Just for a moment. Oh, a few trinkets, Monsieur Poirot. Nothing of great value, though. Sentiment, you know, outweighs gold." "Indeed," Poirot murmured, his eyes narrowing. "But sometimes gold, it carries its own sentiments, does it not?" Before she could respond, a loud clatter broke the moment. Clara had dropped her dessert spoon, and her laugh was sharp, almost defiant. "Clumsy of me," she said, but her eyes locked with Crane's, and Poirot noted the solicitor's knuckles whitening around his glass. As coffee was served, Lady Beatrice rose, smoothing her gown. "I propose we retire to the drawing-room for cards or music. Monsieur Poirot, do you play bridge?" "I am, alas, a poor player of cards, madame," Poirot replied, "but I am most content to observe the game. It reveals much about the players." "Then observe away," Clara said, her tone teasing, but her eyes cold. "You might find this game more interesting than you expect." The guests began to rise, their chairs scraping against the floor. Poirot lingered, his gaze sweeping the table one last time. A wine-glass, slightly smudged with lipstick, stood askew at Mrs. Marlowe's place. A napkin, crumpled in a way that suggested agitation, lay beside Dr. Graham's plate, and at the head of the table, Lady Beatrice's untouched coffee steamed faintly, as if she too were distracted by thoughts she dared not voice. "Hastings," Poirot whispered as they moved toward the drawing-room. "This dinner, it was not merely a meal. It was a prelude. The curtain, it rises slowly, but rise it will." Hastings, sipping his coffee, frowned. "You stir reading too much into it, old chap. Just a bunch of people bickering over their claret." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Bickering, mon ami? Non. It is the sound of secrets sharpening their edges." Outside, the wind howled louder, and the chandelier flickered, casting fleeting shadows that seemed to whisper of the storm to come. Chapter 4. The Midnight Scream. The drawing-room of Dunraven Manor buzzed with a brittle sort of merriment as the guests settled into their post-dinner activities. The fire crackled, casting a warm glow over the polished furniture, but the air remained taut, as though the manor itself held its breath. Hercule Poirot, seated in a high-backed armchair near the hearth, declined a hand of bridge, preferring to observe the players with his keen grey eyes. Captain Hastings, less reserved, had joined Miss Clara Wentworth, Dr. Alistair Graham, and Mrs. Evelyn Marlowe, at the card table, where Clara's sharp laughter punctuated the otherwise subdued atmosphere. "Really, Captain, you mustn't be so timid with your bids," Clara teased, tossing down a card with a flourish. "Fortune favors the bold, you know." Hastings, flushing slightly, chuckled. "I stend bold enough, Miss Wentworth, but I stend rather not lose my shirt to you before midnight." Mrs. Marlowe smiled, her diamonds glinting as she leaned forward. "Ah, Clara, let the poor man play in peace. Not everyone thrives on your brand of daring." Dr. Graham, adjusting his spectacles, said nothing, his focus on the cards almost too intense. Poirot noted the doctor's trembling fingers, the way his eyes darted toward the door whenever a servant passed. Across the room, Sir Reginald Ashford lounged with a whisky, regaling Mr. Victor Crane with tales of his latest hunting expedition. Crane, as ever, clutched his leather portfolio, his responses curt and distracted. Lady Beatrice, meanwhile, played a soft melody on the grand piano, her fingers moving with grace, but her expression distant, as if her thoughts were elsewhere. Poirot sipped his tisane, a delicate porcelain cup balanced in his hand. "The harmony of the evening. It is fragile, is it not?" he murmured to himself, his moustache twitching. The little grey cells were restless, sensing the undercurrents of unease that no amount of laughter or music could mask. The clock on the mantel struck 11, its chimes deep and resonant. Lady Beatrice paused her playing, her hands lingering on the keys. "Perhaps we should retire soon," she suggested, her voice betraying a faint tremor. "It's been a long day." "Retire? Nonsense," Sir Reginald boomed, draining his glass. "The night sits young. Beatrice, let's have another round of drinks, eh, Grayson?" The butler, standing silently by the door, inclined his head. "As you wish, sir." But as he moved to fetch the decanter, a piercing scream shattered the room's fragile calm. It was a sound of pure terror, high and raw, echoing from the upper floors of the manor. The card game froze, cards slipping from Clara's hand. Hastings leapt to his feet, his chair scraping against the floor. Lady Beatrice's face drained of colour, her hands clutching the piano for support. "Mon Dieu!" Poirot exclaimed, rising swiftly, his tisane forgotten. Quickly Hastings to the source. The guests erupted into chaos, voices overlapping as they stumbled toward the door. Poirot, with surprising agility for his compact frame, led the way, his patent leather shoes clicking on the stone floor of the great hall. The scream had come from the east wing, where the guest bedrooms were located. Grayson, ever composed, produced a ring of keys and followed close behind. As they ascended the grand staircase, the manor seemed to close in around them, its shadows deeper, its silence more oppressive. Another scream, shorter, choked, cut through the air, then stopped abruptly. Poirot's eyes narrowed, his mind racing. They reached a heavy oak door at the end of a dimly lit corridor. It was locked, and the silence beyond was deafening. "Open it, Grayson," Poirot commanded, his voice sharp. The butler fumbled with the keys, his hands less steady than before. The lock clicked, and the door swung open to reveal a chilling scene. Mrs. Evelyn Marlowe's bedroom was in disarray. A chair lay overturned, its velvet cushion slashed, the window was shut tight, the curtains undisturbed, and there, sprawled across the four-poster bed, lay Mrs. Marlowe herself, her diamond earrings still glinting in the lamplight. Her face was frozen in a mask of horror, her throat marked by a thin crimson line, a silver letter opener, its handle ornate with the Ashford crest, protruded from her chest. Lady Beatrice gasped, clutching Sir Reginald's arm. Clara's hand flew to her mouth, her usual bravado gone. Dr. Graham pushed forward, his medical instincts kicking in, but one glance at the body confirmed what was obvious. "She's dead," he said, his voice hollow, strangled and stabbed. And ours. Crane, standing at the back, gripped his portfolio tighter, his face ashen. "This is monstrous," he muttered, almost to himself. Poirot stepped forward, his eyes sweeping the room with clinical precision. "Do not touch anything, s'il vous plaît," he said, his tone calm but commanding. "The scene, it must remain undisturbed for the little grey cells to work." Hastings, peering over Poirot Sixth's shoulder, shuddered. "Good Lord, Poirot! Who could have done this?" The door was locked. "Précisément," Poirot replied, his gaze lingering on the letter opener, then shifting to the smudged lipstick on a glass by the bedside. "The locked door. It is a puzzle. But puzzles, they are made to be solved." The guests stood frozen, their faces a gallery of shock, fear, and Poirot noted something else. Guilt, perhaps, or merely the weight of secrets suddenly exposed to the light. "Grayson," Poirot said, turning to the butler, "summon the local constabulary at once, and ensure no one leaves the manor." As Grayson hurried off, Poirot knelt beside the body, his expression unreadable. "Madame Marlowe," he murmured, "what did you see in your final moments, and who, I wonder, wished to silence you forever?" The wind howled outside, rattling the window, as if the manor itself mourned the tragedy or concealed its perpetrator. Chapter 5. The Locked Room. The air in Mrs. Evelyn Marlowe's bedroom was thick with the scent of lavender perfume and the metallic tang of blood. The lamplight cast eerie shadows across the walls, illuminating the grim tableau. Mrs. Marlowe's lifeless form on the bed, her diamond earrings catching the light, the silver letter opener with the Ashford crest protruding from her chest. The locked door, which had yielded only to Grayson's key, loomed as the central enigma, a challenge that Hercule Poirot's little grey cells were already dissecting. Poirot stood at the centre of the room, his compact figure radiating authority despite the chaos around him. "Messieurs et mesdames," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I must ask you all to remain outside the room. The scene, it is delicate, and the truth, it hides in the details." Lady Beatrice, still clinging to Sir Reginald's arm, nodded shakily. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot. We'll wait in the corridor." Her voice wavered, and her eyes avoided the body, as if denying its reality. Clara Wentworth, her usual bravado, replaced by a pallor that matched her white silk dress, leaned against the wall. "How could this happen?" she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. The door was locked. "Indeed, mademoiselle," Poirot replied, his eyes never leaving the room. "The locked door. It is the heart of this puzzle. But Poirot, he does not believe in impossibilities." Captain Hastings, hovering near the doorway, scratched his head. "Dash it all, Poirot, it sits like something out of a novel. Strangled, stabbed, and in a locked room. It sits impossible." "Impossible?" Poirot Sixth's moustache twitched with a faint smile. "Non, mon ami. It is merely improbable, and the improbable, it yields to method and logic." Dr. Alistair Graham, who had retreated to the corridor but kept glancing back, adjusted his spectacles nervously. "Monsieur Poirot," As a medical man, I can confirm she was strangled first. Those marks on her throat are unmistakable. The stabbing, it came after. But why both? A question most pertinent, Doctor, Poirot said, kneeling beside the bed to examine the body. He noted the precise angle of the letter opener, the lack of blood around the wound suggesting it was post-mortem, and the faint smudge of lipstick on the glass by the bedside, now joined by a second fainter smudge on the rim. Curieux, he murmured, filing the detail away. Sir Reginald, his face flushed with either shock or whiskey, cleared his throat. This is madness, Poirot. Evelyn was, well, spirited. But who sit'd want her dead like this? And how the devil did they get in? Poirot rose, brushing his hands with a handkerchief. How, Sir Reginald? That is what we shall discover. Now, let us examine the room with care. He moved to the window, testing its latch. It was firmly locked, the frame old but intact, with no signs of tampering. The heavy velvet curtains hung undisturbed, their folds pristine. Mr. Victor Crane, still clutching his portfolio, spoke from the doorway, his voice tight. The window sits, no use, Monsieur Poirot. This wing is 2 stories up, with nothing but sheer stone below. No one could climb in or out. Poirot's eyes gleamed. You are most observant, Monsieur Crane. But the absence of an exit, it does not mean the absence of a method. He turned to the door, inspecting the lock and keyhole. The mechanism was old but sturdy, with no scratches or signs of forced entry. Grayson, he called to the butler, who stood rigidly nearby. This key, it is the only one to this room. Yes, sir, Grayson replied, his face pale but composed. Each guest room has a unique key, kept in the housekeeper Sift's office when not in use. Mrs. Marlowe had hers, and I used the master key to open the door. And where is Mrs. Marlowe's key now? Poirot asked, his tone deceptively mild. Grayson hesitated, then pointed to a small table near the bed. There, sir, beside her handbag. Poirot examined the key, a heavy brass affair with the Ashford crest etched into its bow. It lay untouched, its surface gleaming faintly. Most interesting, he said, then turned to the overturned chair. The slashed cushion caught his eye, its stuffing spilling out like a wound. He ran a finger along the tier, noting its clean, deliberate cut. Clara, watching from the corridor, shivered. It sells ghastly. That chair, it sells. Someone was searching for something. Or concealing something? Poirot replied, his voice low. He moved to the fireplace, where a few embers glowed faintly. A small pile of ash caught his attention, the remnants of burned paper, its edges curled, but no legible words remaining. Tiens, he muttered. Someone was most eager to destroy evidence. Lady Beatrice, her composure fraying, wrung her hands. Monsieur Poirot, what does it all mean? Evelyn was our guest, our friend. This brutality, it sits unthinkable. Poirot turned to her, his expression grave but kind. Madame, the truth, it is often unthinkable until it is revealed, but rest assured, Hercule Poirot will uncover it. Now, I must ask, did Madame Marlowe have enemies here, or perhaps secrets? The guests exchanged glances, some wary, others defensive. Sir Reginald huffed. Enemies? Nonsense. Evelyn was charming, a bit flirtatious perhaps, but harmless. Harmless. Clara Sitt's voice was sharp, her eyes flashing. She had a way of digging into people Sitt's business, Sir Reginald. You know that as well as I do. Enough, Clara. Lady Beatrice snapped, her voice cutting through the tension. "This is not the time for accusations." Poirot raised a hand, silencing the room. "Accusations, madame. They will come in time. For now, we observe, we question, we think. Grayson, ensure this room is locked once more. No one enters without my permission." As the guests filed back toward the drawing room, their faces etched with fear and suspicion, Hastings leaned close to Poirot. "This is a rum business, Poirot. A locked room, a double murder method, and all these people acting cagey. Where do you even start?" Poirot's eyes twinkled with determination. "We start, mon ami, with the room itself. It speaks, if one listens. And Poirot, he listens always." The corridor grew quiet as Grayson locked the door, the click echoing like a final note in the night's grim symphony. Outside, the wind moaned, and Dunraven Manor seemed to settle deeper into its secrets, waiting for Poirot to unravel them. Chapter 6: Suspicions and Alibis. The drawing-room of Dunraven Manor, once a haven of forced civility, now felt like a stage for a grim inquisition. The fire had dwindled to glowing embers, casting a ruddy light over the guests, who sat in uneasy silence, their faces etched with shock and suspicion. Hercule Poirot stood near the hearth, his compact figure commanding the room despite its sombre mood. His grey eyes, sharp and unyielding, moved from one guest to another, as if peeling back their facades to glimpse the truths beneath. Captain Hastings, seated on a velvet settee, shifted uncomfortably. "Dash it, Poirot," he whispered, "this lot looks like they've seen a ghost. Poor Mrs. Marlowe. It's shaken them all." "Shaken? Oui," Poirot replied softly, his moustache twitching, "but not all for the same reasons, mon ami. Observe their faces, fear, yes, but also guilt, and perhaps calculation." Lady Beatrice Ashford, pale but composed, sat rigidly in an armchair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice strained but steady, "the constabulary will arrive soon, but until then, what do you propose? This tragedy has left us all reeling." Poirot inclined his head. "Madame, the tragedy, it is not merely an event, but a puzzle. And to solve it, we must begin with the facts. Each of you, s'il vous plaît, will account for your movements this evening, from the end of dinner until the scream was heard." A murmur of unease rippled through the room. Sir Reginald, nursing a fresh whisky, scoffed. "Movements? Are we suspects now, Poirot? I was right here, playing cards with Clara and the others, until we retired to the drawing-room." "Indeed, Sir Reginald," Poirot said, his tone deceptively mild. "And yet the scream, it came at midnight. That leaves time unaccounted for. Let us proceed methodically. Lady Beatrice, perhaps you will begin." Lady Beatrice Stick's lips tightened, but she nodded. "After dinner, I played the piano for a time, then joined the others here for cards. I retired to my room around 10:30 to fetch a shawl. I was alone there until the scream brought me running." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Alone, madame? And your room, it is in the east wing, near Madame Marlowe sits?" "Yes," she admitted, her fingers twisting a pearl ring, "just 2 doors down. But I heard nothing until that dreadful scream." "Curieux," Poirot murmured, then turned to Clara Wentworth, who sat with her arms crossed, her expression defiant. "Mademoiselle Wentworth." Clara shrugged, her bobbed hair catching the firelight. "I was at the card table with Captain Hastings, Dr. Graham, and Evelyn herself, until about 11. Then I went to my room to freshen up. I was there when I heard the scream. Alone before you ask. Poirot's gaze lingered on her, noting the slight flush in her cheeks. And you heard nothing unusual, mademoiselle? No footsteps? No voices? Nothing, Clara said sharply, then softened. Well, perhaps a door creaking down the hall, but that's common in this creaky old pile. Dr. Alistair Graham cleared his throat, his spectacles glinting as he adjusted them. I, too, was at the card table until 11. I went to my room to review some medical notes. My room is in the west wing, though, far from Mrs. Marlowe sits. Poirot tilted his head. Medical notes, doctor, at such an hour? Most diligent. Graham flushed. It sets a habit, Monsieur Poirot. I find it calming to work before bed. And you, Monsieur Crane? Poirot turned to the solicitor, who stood apart, his portfolio still clutched tightly. Cranestead's voice was clipped. I remained here after dinner, discussing business with Sir Reginald until about 10:45. Then I retired to my room, also in the west wing. I was reading when the scream came. Business. Poirot's tone was light, but his eyes were sharp. At such a social occasion. Crane hesitated, his grip tightening on the portfolio. A minor regarding the estate. Nothing relevant. Poirot's moustache twitched, but he moved on to Sir Reginald. And you, monsieur? The baronet shifted in his seat, his joviality gone. Like I said, I was here chatting with Crane, then joined the card game briefly. Went to my study for a cigar around 11. Heard the scream from there. Your study, Poirot repeated, which is on the ground floor. None. Far from the east wing. That sits right, Sir Reginald said, his eyes narrowing. What are you driving at, Poirot? Merely clarity, Sir Reginald, Poirot replied smoothly. And you, Grayson? He turned to the butler, who stood by the door, his face a mask of professionalism. I was in the servants' hall, sir, overseeing the clearing of the dining room, Grayson said. I returned to the drawing room just before 11 to serve drinks, then went back to the servants' quarters until the scream. Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing each alibi, each hesitation. Born. Now, let us consider motives. Madame Marlowe, she was a woman of charm. But also of secrets. Did she perhaps know something that made her dangerous? Clara laughed bitterly. Evelyn, she was a magpie for gossip. Always prying, always hinting she knew more than she let on. Didn't make her many friends. Clara, Lady Beatrice snapped. That sift's unkind. But true, Clara retorted. She was always asking about the Ashford estate, the family jewels, even my inheritance. Nosy, that's what she was. Dr. Graham adjusted his spectacles again. She did ask me about certain medical matters, but it was harmless curiosity. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Medical matters, doctor? Of what nature? Graham hesitated. Just general questions about health, nothing specific. And you, Monsieur Crane? Poirot pressed. Did Madame Marlowe show interest in your business? Cranestead's face darkened. She asked about the estate's finances, but I told her it was none of her concern. Poirot turned to Sir Reginald and Lady Beatrice. And you, did Madame Marlowe probe into your affairs? Sir Reginald bristled. She was a guest, Poirot, not a detective. She asked about the manor set's history. That set's all liked the old stories. Lady Beatrice nodded, but her eyes flickered. She was curious about our family heirlooms. The Ashford sapphire, in particular, the Ashford sapphire. Poirot Sist's voice was soft, but his interest was palpable. A jewel of some value, I presume? Priceless, Lady Beatrice said quietly. Its set's been in the family for generations, locked in the safe in Reginald Set's study. Poirot filed this away, his mind buzzing. Merci, all of you. Your candor. It is most illuminating. Now, we await the constabulary, but rest assured, Hercule Poirot will not rest until the truth is revealed. As the guests dispersed to their rooms under Grayson Set's watchful eye, Hastings leaned close. What do you make of it, Poirot? Everyone Set's got an alibi, but they Set's all so jumpy. Jumpy? Oui, Hercule Poirot replied, his eyes distant. But alibis, Hastings, they are like mirrors, polished but easily cracked, and motives, they are beginning to take shape. The manor's clock chimed one, its toll heavy in the silence. Outside the wind wailed, as if urging Poirot to uncover the secrets Dunraven Manor held in its shadowed heart. Chapter 7. The Missing Heirloom. The air in Dunraven Manor grew heavier as the clock in the great hall struck 2 in the morning. The guests, confined to the drawing-room under Hercule Poirot's watchful eye, sat in uneasy silence, their nerves frayed by the murder of Mrs. Evelyn Marlowe and the distant wail of police sirens approaching through the Devonshire mist. Poirot, standing by the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back, radiated a calm that contrasted sharply with the room's tension. His grey eyes, however, burned with the intensity of his little grey cells at work. Captain Hastings, pacing near the window, glanced at Poirot. The police will be here soon, Poirot. Surely they still take over now. This locked room business is enough to drive anyone batty. Poirot Sist's moustache twitched. The police, mon ami, they will bring order, but it is Hercule Poirot who will bring clarity. The locked room, it is but one piece of the puzzle, and now I suspect another piece has fallen into place. Before Hastings could press further, Lady Beatrice Ashford rose abruptly, her face ashen. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice trembling, I must speak with you privately. It sets urgent. Poirot inclined his head. Of course, madame. Let us adjourn to the study.
Hastings, you will join us.
The three crossed the great hall to Sir Reginald's study, a wood-panelled room lined with hunting trophies and leather-bound books. A heavy safe, its brass fittings gleaming, stood in one corner. Lady Beatrice's hands shook as she approached it, her pearl ring glinting in the lamplight. It sits the Ashford sapphire, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I checked the safe after we left Evelyn Set's room. It sits gone. Poirot Sist's eyes narrowed. Tiens, the sapphire you spoke of at dinner, madame, the priceless heirloom. Yes, she replied, wringing her hands. It's been in the Ashford family for 3 centuries. A blue gem the size of a quail's set's egg set in a silver pendant. It was locked in this safe yesterday evening. Only Reginald and I know the combination. Hastings whistled softly. Good Lord, a jewel theft on top of a murder. This is getting murkier by the minute. Poirot moved to the safe, inspecting its lock with care. No scratches, no signs of tampering. And when did you last see the sapphire, madam? Yesterday, before dinner, Lady Beatrice said. I checked it myself, as I always do before guests arrive. It was there, I swear it. Poirot Sist's gaze shifted to Sir Reginald, who had followed them into the study, his face flushed with agitation. And you, monsieur, when did you last see this jewel? Sir Reginald, ran a hand through his greying hair. Same as Beatrice yesterday evening. I locked the safe myself.
7.
Setst opened it since. Curieux, Poirot murmured, his fingers brushing the safe sept's handle. A locked room, a locked safe, and yet both have been breached. Tell me, Madame Monsieur, who else knew of the sapphire sept's presence here? Lady Beatrice hesitated. Only the family, really. And, well, Evelyn asked about it at dinner. As you heard, she was always fascinated by it, ever since she visited last year. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And did Madame Marlowe, perhaps, know the combination? Absolutely not. Sir Reginald snapped. She was a guest, not a confidant. The combination is private, family only. Poirot nodded, his mind racing. Ball. We shall return to the drawing room. The police, they will wish to inspect the safe, but for now, we keep this matter between us. No word to the others. S'il vous plaît. As they rejoined the guests, Poirot's demeanour remained serene, but his observations were relentless. Clara Wentworth sat with her arms crossed, her eyes darting to the door, as if expecting escape. Dr. Alistair Graham clutched his pocket watch, his fingers trembling. Victor Crane, his portfolio now resting on his lap, stared into the fire, his face unreadable. Grayson the butler stood by the door, his posture rigid, but his eyes flickering with unease. Monsieur Poirot, Clara said, breaking the silence. You said been whispering with the Ashfords. Found the killer yet, or are we all still under your microscope? Poirot smiled faintly. Mademoiselle, the microscope of Poirot, it sees all, but it reveals only when the time is right. For now, I have a question. Did any of you visit the study this evening? A chorus of denials followed, each guest's voice tinged with varying degrees of conviction. Dr. Graham adjusted his spectacles. I was in my room. As I said, never went near the study. Nor I, Crane added quickly. I had no reason to. Clara raised an eyebrow. What's 6 in the study? That's 6 so interesting, Monsieur Poirot. Another locked room mystery. Perhaps, Poirot replied, his tone enigmatic. But the study, it is a place of significance. Tell me, mademoiselle, did Madame Marlowe ever speak to you of the Ashford sapphire? Clara Stade's lips parted, then closed. She mentioned it once or twice, said it was a shame say. Such a gem was hidden away. I thought she was just being her usual nosy self. Poirot turned to Grayson. And you, Monsieur Grayson, did you perhaps overhear Madame Marlowe discussing this jewel? The butler stiffened. I make it a point not to eavesdrop, sir. But I did hear her ask Lady Beatrice about the sapphire during her last visit. She seemed quite taken with it. Merci, Poirot said, his mind cataloguing each response. The sapphire's disappearance, so soon after the murder, was no coincidence. It was a thread in the tapestry of this crime, and Poirot was determined to follow it. As the distant crunch of gravel announced the police sept's arrival, Hastings leaned close. Poirot, this sapphire business, do you think it sets the motive? Someone killed Mrs. Marlowe to get to the jewel. Poirot's eyes twinkled. The motive, Hastings, it is like a shadow present, but not yet clear. The sapphire, it is a piece of the puzzle, but not the whole picture. We must look deeper, into the hearts of those who sit among us. The drawing-room door opened, admitting a stern-faced police inspector, his coat damp from the mist. Monsieur Poirot, he said, nodding respectfully, I situm Inspector Lyle. I understand you said been keeping things in hand. For the moment, Inspector, Poirot replied, bowing slightly. But the truth, it awaits us. And Hercule Poirot, he will not disappoint. As the inspector began organizing his men, Poirot's gaze lingered on the guests, each a potential piece in the intricate game of murder and theft now unfolding at Dunraven Manor. Chapter 8. Shadows of the Past. The drawing-room of Dunraven Manor, now bathed in the grey light of early morning, felt more like a courtroom than a place of leisure. The police, under Inspector Lyle's brisk direction, had secured Mrs. Marlowe's room and were examining the study, but Hercule Poirot remained the true orchestrator of the investigation. He stood by the window, the mist outside curling like smoke over the moors, his grey eyes reflecting a mind at work. The guests, exhausted but sleepless, sat in tense silence, their alibis and secrets now under scrutiny. Captain Hastings, stifling a yawn, leaned toward Poirot. "This is a grim business, Poirot. Murder, a stolen sapphire, and now we sit all cooped up like suspects in a penny dreadful. What sets next?" Poirot's mustache twitched. "Next, mon ami, we uncover the shadows that linger in this house. The past, it is a map to the present, and Dunraven Manor, it has a history that speaks to this crime." Inspector Lyle, a sturdy man with a no-nonsense mustache, approached Poirot. "Monsieur Poirot, my men have confirmed the room was locked tight, no signs of forced entry. The safe, too, shows no tampering. If you sip any theories, I sipped be glad to hear them." Poirot inclined his head. "Theories, Inspector. They come when the facts are assembled. But I have questions, and the answers they lie with those present. May I continue my inquiries?" Lyle nodded gruffly. "Carry on, but keep me informed. This is a devil of a case." Poirot turned to the guests, his voice calm but commanding. "Messieurs et mesdames, the murder of Madame Marlowe and the theft of the Ashford sapphire, they are not isolated acts. They are rooted in the history of this manor, and your connections to it. I ask now, what ties you to Dunraven, and what secrets do you carry from the past?" Lady Beatrice, her face pale but resolute, spoke first. "Dunraven has been the Ashford family seat for centuries. My husband inherited it from his father, Lord Edmund Ashford, who, well, he was a man of strong passions. There were scandals, debts, affairs, but nothing that should lead to this. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Scandals, madame? Of what nature?" Sir Reginald shifted uncomfortably, his whiskey glass empty. "My father was a gambler, Poirot. Lost a fortune at cards before he died. The sapphire was nearly sold to cover his debts, but my mother refused. That's old news, though." "Old news, perhaps," Poirot said, "but news that lingers. Madame Marlowe, did she know of these debts?" Lady Beatrice hesitated. She hinted at it last year, during her first visit. She had a knack for unearthing gossip, said she heard stories in London about the Ashford troubles. Clea Wentworth, her arms crossed, snorted. "Evelyn was a vulture for that sort of thing. She asked me about my family too. My father accepted bankruptcy before he died, as if it were her business." Poirot turned to her, his gaze piercing. "Your father, mademoiselle? A bankruptcy, you say? And how did Madame Marlowe come to know of it?" Clara's eyes flashed. "She didn't say. Probably dug it up in some society column. She loved to poke at old wounds, especially if they made you squirm. Dr. Alistair Graham, his spectacles fogging slightly, cleared his throat. She asked me about my practice in London years ago, before I moved to the country. There was an incident. A patient died under my care. It was an accident, but the rumours were vicious. Evelyn brought it up last night, as if it were a casual jest. Poirot's moustache twitched. An accident, doctor, or something more. Graham Sept's face reddened. An accident, Monsieur Poirot. The inquest cleared me. But Evelyn, she implied she knew otherwise. Curieux, Poirot murmured, then turned to Mr. Victor Crane, whose fingers tightened around his leather portfolio. And you, Monsieur Crane, did Madame Marlowe probe into your past? Crane's lips thinned. She asked about my work for the Ashfords' legal matters, estate planning. I told her it was confidential, but she mentioned a case I handled years ago, a disputed will. She should instead have known about it. Poirot's eyes narrowed. A disputed will? And who was involved, monsieur? Crane hesitated, then said, "It was a minor matter, long resolved. A distant cousin of the Ashfords, claiming a share of the estate. It came to nothing." Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing each revelation. "And you, Grayson?" he asked, turning to the butler, who stood by the door, his face impassive. Grayson's voice was steady. "I served the Ashfords for 20 years, sir." Mrs. Marlowe asked about the Manor's history, ghost stories mostly. She seemed amused by tales of Lord Edmund Sitst's indiscretions. Ghost stories. Poirot's tone was light, but his eyes were sharp. Or perhaps stories of hidden treasures, like the Ashford sapphire. Grayson stiffened. "She may have mentioned the sapphire, sir, but I dismissed it as idle curiosity." Poirot paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. So Madame Marlowe, she was a collector of secrets, debts, bankruptcies, accidents, disputed wills. And each secret, it ties you to Dunraven Manor, to its past, and to each other. But there is more, I think. Tell me, Lady Beatrice, this distant cousin Monsieur Crane mentioned, who was he? Lady Beatrice, Sit's hands trembled. "It was my brother Charles. He believed he was entitled to part of the estate after our father Sit's death. There was a quarrel, years ago. He left for America, and hasn't Sit's been heard from since." "America?" Poirot repeated, his mind buzzing. "And Madame Marlowe, did she know of this brother?" She asked about him last year," Lady Beatrice admitted. "Said Sitst met someone in London who claimed to know him. I thought it was just her usual gossip." Poirot's eyes gleamed with sudden intensity. "Someone who knew him. Tiens, this is most illuminating. The past, it casts long shadows, and Madame Marlowe, she stood in their path." Hastings, listening intently, leaned forward. "Poirot, are you saying her murder sits tied to this old family feud?" "Not only the feud," Hastings, Poirot replied, "but the connections it weaves. The sapphire, the secrets, the manor. They are threads in a tapestry, and Poirot, he will unravel it." As Inspector Lyle re-entered, announcing that the safe had yielded no fingerprints, the guests exchanged wary glances. Clara's eyes lingered on Crane's portfolio, Graham's hand strayed to his pocket watch, and Lady Beatrice's gaze drifted to the portrait of Lord Edmund above the fireplace, his stern eyes seeming to watch them all. Outside, the mist thickened, cloaking Dunraven Manor in a veil of secrets that Poirot was determined to pierce. Chapter 9. The Second Tragedy. The morning light, grey and feeble, filtered through the heavy curtains of Dunraven Manor's drawing room, doing little to dispel the pall of dread that hung over the guests. The police, led by Inspector Lyle, were still combing the crime scene in Mrs. Marlowe's room and the study, but Hercule Poirot's presence dominated the investigation. He stood near the fireplace, his compact figure a beacon of calm amid the storm, his grey eyes scanning the room with unrelenting focus. The revelation of the missing Ashford sapphire and the tangled web of past secrets had tightened the knot of suspicion, and the guests' strained faces betrayed their fear that the worst was not yet over. Captain Hastings, rubbing his eyes after a sleepless night, muttered, "This place is cursed, Poirot. First a murder, then a theft. How much worse can it get?" Poirot's moustache twitched. "Worse, mon ami. The wheel of fate. It turns swiftly. And Poirot, he senses it has not yet stopped." As if on cue, a sharp cry echoed from the dining room, where breakfast had been laid out for the shaken household. The guests froze, their heads turning toward the sound. Poirot moved with surprising speed, his patent leather shoes clicking on the stone floor, followed closely by Hastings and Inspector Lyle. The others trailed behind, their footsteps hesitant. In the dining room, Clara Wentworth stood clutching the table, her face pale as chalk, a half-empty coffee cup trembling in her hand. She gasped, her voice ragged. "It burns. My throat. Something's wrong." Dr. Alistair Graham, already at her side, caught her as she swayed, his medical instincts overriding his nervous demeanor. "Clara, sit down, quickly." He eased her into a chair, his hands fumbling for her pulse. "Her pulse is racing. Inspector, fetch my bag. It sits in my room." Lyle barked an order to a constable, who hurried off. Poirot knelt beside Clara, his eyes sharp as he examined the coffee cup. A faint, acrid scent lingered, barely noticeable amid the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. "Mon Dieu," he murmured. "This is no accident. Mademoiselle, when did you drink this?" Just now," Clara gasped, her hands clutching her throat. "It tasted bitter, but I thought the coffee was strong." Lady Beatrice, hovering nearby, wrung her hands. "Oh, Clara, this is dreadful. Grayson, how could this happen?" The butler, standing rigidly by the sideboard, looked stricken. "Madam, I prepared the coffee myself. It was from the same pot as everyone else." Sixth. Poirot's gaze swept the table, noting the other cups. Sir Reginald sits, half drunk. Lady Beatrice sits, untouched. Crane sits, empty but for a dark stain at the bottom. "Inspector," Poirot said, his voice urgent, "secure this pot and all cups. They must be tested at once." Dr. Graham returned with his bag, administered a mild sedative, and forced Clara to drink water to dilute whatever she'd ingested. "It's likely a poison," he said, his voice unsteady. "Possibly cyanide, given the symptoms: bitter taste, burning throat. But she didn't drink enough for a fatal dose. Thank God." Clara, her breathing steadying, glared weakly at the room. "Someone tried to kill me. Why? Because I know too much. Like Evelyn?" Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Mademoiselle, what is it you know? Speak, before the poison clouds your memory." Clara shook her head, her voice hoarse. I don't. That's no. Evelyn was always hinting about the sapphire, about secrets. She said something last night about say the truth being worth more than gold. I thought she was just being dramatic. "Q you," Poirot murmured. His mind racing, he turned to Grayson. Monsieur Grayson, who served the coffee. I did, sir, Grayson replied, his face pale. I poured from the pot and placed the cups myself. No one tampered with them while I was present. And yet, Poirot said, tampering there was. Inspector, test the pot, but also the sugar bowl, the cream, everything on this table. Sir Reginald, his face flushed with anger, slammed a fist on the table. This is madness. First Evelyn, now Clara. Someone sits trying to wipe us out, one by one. Lady Beatrice clutched his arm. Reginald, please. Monsieur Poirot, you must stop this before it's too late. Poirot Sit's expression was grave. Madam, the little grey cells, they work tirelessly. But this second tragedy, it tells us much. The killer, he is bold, but also desperate. The sapphire, the murder, the poison, they are linked, and the link lies in the secrets we have begun to uncover. Mr. Victor Crane, his portfolio clutched tightly, spoke up, his voice tight. Monsieur Poirot, are you suggesting this is about the sapphire, that someone poisoned Clara to cover their tracks? Poirot Sit's eyes gleamed. The sapphire, Monsieur Crane, it is a motive, oui, but not the only one. The poison, it was meant to silence, just as the letter opener silenced Madame Marlowe. But why Mademoiselle Wentworth? What does she know? Or what does the killer fear she knows? Clara, her strength returning, fixed Poirot with a defiant stare. I don't stay to know anything, Monsieur Poirot, but Evelyn, she was digging into everyone Sit's past. She told me she Sit's found something about the Ashfords, about the sapphire Sit's history. She wouldn't Sit say more. Poirot nodded, filing this away. Pon, mademoiselle, you must rest, but remain vigilant. Inspector, ensure a constable stays with her. No one else must fall to this shadow. As Dr. Graham escorted Clara to her room, accompanied by a constable, Hastings leaned close to Poirot. Oh, this is getting out of hand, Poirot. Poison now. The killer Sit's playing a dangerous game. Oui, Hastings, Poirot replied, his voice low, but a desperate game too. The poison, it was clumsy, imprecise. The killer is rattled, and a rattled mind makes mistakes. We are close, mon ami, to a truth that burns like cyanide. Inspector Lyle approached, holding a small vial of residue from the coffee pot. We still have this analyzed, Monsieur Poirot, but I still need statements from everyone again. This is no longer just a murder case. Indeed, Poirot said, his gaze sweeping the remaining guests. Lady Beatrice, her face drawn, Sir Reginald, his anger masking fear, Crane, his portfolio a shield, Grayson, his composure fraying, the net tightens, Inspector, and Hercule Poirot, he will ensure it catches its prey. Outside, the mist swirled, and Dunraven Manor seemed to pulse with the weight of its secrets as Poirot's mind wove the threads of murder, theft, and poison into a pattern only he could yet see. Chapter 10. The Little Grey Cells at Work. The late morning light struggled through the mist that clung to Dunraven Manor, casting a pallid glow over the drawing-room where the guests remained under the watchful eye of Inspector Lyle's constables. The air was thick with suspicion, the earlier shock of Mrs. Marlowe's murder and Clara Wentworth's poisoning now compounded by restless fear. Hercule Poirot, however, had withdrawn to a quiet corner of the library, a cavernous room lined with dusty tomes and portraits of stern-faced Ashfords. Fords, he sat in a leather armchair, his eyes half closed, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, the little grey cells humming with activity. Captain Hastings, who had followed him, fidgeted near a bookshelf. "Poirot, you can't just sit there meditating like some Eastern mystic. Clara's nearly been poisoned, the sapphire's gone, and we're no closer to catching the killer. Shouldn't we be questioning someone or searching the manor?" "You taff." Poirot opened one eye, his moustache twitching with amusement. "Hastings, mon ami, the body. It runs, but the mind, it must walk. To rush is to stumble. The clues, they are all here, in the locked room, the burned paper, the poisoned coffee, the missing sapphire. Now, Poirot, he arranges them, like pieces on a chessboard, to see the game." Hastings sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Well, I wish your chessboard would hurry up. This lot, it's ready to tear each other apart. Did you see how Crane keeps clutching that portfolio? And Graham sits practically jumping out of his skin." "Précisément," Poirot murmured, his eyes fully open now, gleaming with intensity. "The behavior, it betrays the heart. But let us review, Hastings, for the truth, it begins to take shape. Attend, s'il vous plaît." He rose, pacing slowly, his voice low and deliberate. "First, Madame Marlowe. She is strangled, then stabbed in a locked room, the letter opener bearing the Ashford crest. The stabbing, it is unnecessary, post-mortem, as Dr. Graham confirms. Why then? To send a message, perhaps, or to obscure the true method." Hastings nodded, following along. "And the locked room, no way in or out, except that key on the table. Could someone have had a duplicate? Possible." Poirot conceded, but unlikely. "The key, it is unique, and Grayson Sest's master key was secure. No, the answer lies elsewhere, perhaps in the timing, or the room itself. The slashed cushion, the burned paper in the fireplace, these suggest a search, a concealment." "Then there sticks the sapphire," Hastings added, "stolen from a locked safe. No signs of tampering. Only Sir Reginald and Lady Beatrice knew the combination." "Oui," Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. "And Madame Marlowe, she was curious about this sapphire, as were others. Its theft, it is no coincidence, it is tied to her death. But how? A motive for murder, or a distraction?" "And now Clara Sett's poisoning," Hastings said, shaking his head. "Cyanide in her coffee, but no one else Sett's. Why her? She said Evelyn hinted at knowing something valuable about the sapphire or the Ashford Sett's past." Poirot stopped pacing, his gaze distant. "Mademoiselle Wentworth, she is a target because she is a threat or because the killer believes she is. Her survival, it is fortunate, but it tells us the killer is growing careless. The poison, it was clumsy, unlike the precision of the locked room." Hastings frowned. "So what sets the connection? The sapphire, the murder, the poisoning, all this talk of old scandals and secrets. The sit's a muddle, Poirot." "Not a muddle, Hastings," Poirot replied, his voice firm. "A pattern. It's secrets of Dunraven, Lord Edmund's debts, Lady Beatrice's brother, Dr. Graham's patient, Crane's disputed will, even Grayson's long service, they intertwine. Madame Marlowe, she was the catalyst, stirring these shadows, and someone, they wished to silence her. And now Mademoiselle Wentworth." He paused, his eyes gleaming. "But there is more. The sapphire, it is not merely a jewel, it is a symbol of wealth, of legacy, of betrayal, and the killer, They are here, among us, hiding in plain sight. A knock at the library door interrupted them. Inspector Lyle entered, his face grim. "Monsieur Poirot, the lab results are back. The coffee pot had no poison, but Clarisse's cup had traces of cyanide. Someone tampered with it after it was poured." Poirot, Stitt's eyes lit up. "A's tiens. This is most illuminating. The cyanide. It was added with precision, but not enough to kill. A warning, perhaps, or a mistake." Lyle shrugged. "Your guess is as good as mine. We've searched the guests' rooms. Nothing yet, no sapphire, no poison. But we found this in the servants' hall." He held up a small, crumpled envelope, its edge singed as if it had been partially burned. Poirot took it, his fingers careful. The envelope bore no address, but inside was a fragment of paper, with a single word scrawled in a hurried hand. "Charles Poirot Sitz," mustache twitched. Charles, Lady Beatrice Sitz's brother, the one who disputed the estate. Most curious, Hawes. Hastings leaned over. "Good Lord, Poirot, you think he sets involved, but he sets in America. Or so we are told," Poirot said, his voice soft but laden with meaning. "The past, Hastings. It does not stay buried. This envelope, it was meant to be destroyed, like the paper in Madame Marlowe Sitz's fireplace. But the killer, they are not as thorough as they believe." Lyle raised an eyebrow. "You sit saying this Charles fellow might be here, or someone sits using his name?" Poirot smiled enigmatically. "I say only that the truth, it approaches. Inspector, keep this envelope safe, and ensure Mademoiselle Wentworth is guarded. The killer, they may try again." As Lyle left, Hastings shook his head. "You start building quite a case, Poirot, but it's still a tangle. What's your next move?" Poirot returned to his chair, his expression serene. "The next move, mon ami, is to listen to the manor, to the guests, to the silences between their words. The little grey cells, they are never idle. And soon they will reveal the hand that holds the knife and the poison." Outside, the mist began to lift, but Dunraven Manor remained cloaked in its secrets, waiting for Poirot to shine his light into its darkest corners. Chapter 11. The Garden Revelation. The fog that enveloped Dunraven Manor by late afternoon was as thick as the suspicion that permeated its halls. The moors beyond the manor's walls were shrouded in a ghostly veil, and the air carried a damp chill that seemed to seep into the bones. Hercule Poirot, undeterred by the weather, had ventured into the manor's overgrown garden, his Homburg hat tilted against the mist, his overcoat buttoned tightly. He had insisted on examining the grounds, convinced that the manor's secrets extended beyond its stone walls. Captain Hastings, trudging beside him, pulled his scarf tighter. "Really, Poirot, must we traipse about in this soup? The police are handling the searches, and it sits beastly out here." Poirot Sitz's moustache twitched with a faint smile. "The police, mon ami, they search for evidence, but Poirot, he searches for truth. The garden, it is a place of solitude, of secrets whispered in shadows, and today, I sense, it will speak." They followed a gravel path, lined with gnarled yew trees, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers. The garden, once grand, was now a tangle of ivy and neglected rose bushes, its stone benches slick with moss. Poirot's eyes scanned the ground, noting scuffed earth near a low wall, as if someone had recently passed in haste. Their solitude was broken by raised voices near the garden's far end, where a crumbling fountain stood. Poirot gestured for Hastings to follow, moving silently toward the sound. Through the fog, two figures emerged, Clara Wentworth and Mr. Victor Crane, their words sharp and heated. "You can sit, keep dodging me, Victor," Clara snapped, her voice carrying a mix of anger and desperation. "I know what you sit hiding in that portfolio of yours. Evelyn told me enough before she died." Cranet's face was pale, his grip on his leather portfolio white-knuckled. "You cert meddling in things you don't understand, Clara. Evelyn was a fool, and you still be a bigger one if you keep this up." Poirot stepped forward, his presence startling them both. "Pardon, mes amis," he said, his voice calm but edged with authority. "But the garden, it is not the place for such private discussions. Perhaps you will share with Hercule Poirot what brings you to this confrontation." Clara's eyes widened, but she recovered quickly, her chin lifting defiantly. "Monsieur Poirot, I was just asking Mr. Crane about some papers he's been clutching since we arrived. Evelyn said he was handling something for the Ashfords, something tied to the sapphire." Crane's lips thinned. "Miss Wentworth is mistaken. My papers are legal documents, nothing more. Evelyn's gossip has caused enough trouble." Poirot's gaze flicked to the portfolio. "Legal documents, Monsieur Crane, yet you guard them as if they hold the key to this mystery. Perhaps you will permit Poirot to see them." Crane stepped back, his face hardening. "They said confidential. Even you, Monsieur Poirot, have no right to demand them." Before Poirot could press further, a glint in the grass near the fountain caught his eye. He knelt, his gloved fingers brushing aside damp leaves to reveal a small, silver cigarette case, its surface engraved with the initials C.W. Clara Wentworth's. A faint smear of red, like lipstick, marred its edge. "Tiens," Poirot murmured, holding it up. "Mademoiselle Wentworth, this is yours. None. And yet it bears a mark most curious, a shade of lipstick that matches that found in Madame Marlowe's room." Clara's face drained of colour. That's mine, yes, but I lost it yesterday. I didn't I wasn't in Evelyn's room." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Lost, you say? Yet here it is, in the garden, near where you argue with Monsieur Crane, and the lipstick. It suggests a connection to the night of the murder." Cranest's voice was sharp. "Are you accusing her, Poirot, or me? This is absurd." "Not accusing," Poirot said smoothly. "Merely observing the cigarette case. It is a clue, and clues, they do not lie. But people, mon Dieu, they do, mademoiselle. Monsieur, what brought you to this garden to argue so fiercely?" Clara hesitated, then sighed. "Evelyn told me Crane was working on a new will for the Ashfords, one that might cut me out of an inheritance I was promised. I said I'm a distant cousin, you see. She said she's seen papers in his portfolio. Something about Charles, Lady Beatrice, Sit's brother." Cranist's face flushed with anger. "That's a lie. Evelyn was stirring trouble. As always, my work is routine estate planning, nothing more." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Routine, monsieur. Yet you guard your portfolio as if it holds the crown jewels. And this mention of Charles, it echoes the burned envelope we found, with his name scrawled upon it." Hastings, who had been listening intently, interjected. "Good Lord, Poirot, you think Crane hiding something about this Charles fellow? Could he be the killer?" Poirot raised a hand. "Patience, Hastings. The truth, it is like the fog. It obscures, but it also reveals when one looks closely. Mademoiselle Wentworth, Monsieur Crane, you will return to the house. This cigarette case, It will remain with Poirot for now. As Clara and Crane trudged back through the fog, their figures fading into the mist, Hastings shook his head. "How's that cigarette case? Poir, it sits damning for Clara. And Crane sits acting cagey as ever. Are we getting closer?" "Closer? Oui," Poirot replied, his eyes on the fountain, where a faint scuff mark in the moss suggested a recent visitor. "The cigarette case, it narrows the field, but it also complicates. Was it dropped by accident, or placed to mislead? And the argument? Why, here, in the garden, where secrets might be overheard." He paused, his gaze distant. "The killer, Hastings, they are clever, but they are also afraid. The murder, the theft, the poison, the cigarette case, they are threads in a web, and the spider, it is among us." Inside, the manor's clock chimed, a somber reminder of time slipping away. Poirot tucked the cigarette case into his pocket, his mind weaving the clues into a pattern that was almost complete. Chapter 12. The Final Gathering. The drawing-room of Dunraven Manor was suffused with a tense hush as the late afternoon light filtered through the heavy curtains, casting long shadows across the gathered guests. The fire crackled fitfully, its warmth doing little to dispel the chill of apprehension that gripped the room. Hercule Poirot stood at the centre, his compact figure radiating authority, his grey eyes gleaming with the certainty of a man who had unravelled a knot of lies. The guests, Lady Beatrice Ashford, Sir Reginald Ashford, Clara Wentworth, Dr. Alistair Graham, Mr. Victor Crane, and the butler Grayson, sat in a semicircle, their faces a tableau of fear, defiance, and curiosity. Inspector Lyle and his constables stood by the door, ready to act, while Captain Hastings, seated near Poirot, watched with bated breath. "Messieurs et mesdames," Poirot began, his voice clear and deliberate, "the time has come to lay bare the truth of the crimes that have stained Dunraven Manor. A murder, a theft, a poisoning. These are not random acts, but threads in a tapestry of deceit. Hercule Poirot, he has followed these threads, and now he will reveal the pattern." Lady Beatrice, her hands clasped tightly, leaned forward. "Monsieur Poirot, please tell us who did this. Who killed Evelyn and tried to harm Clara?" Poirot raised a hand, his moustache twitching. "Patience, madam. The truth, it is like a fine wine. It must be savoured slowly. Let us begin with the murder of Madame Marlowe, found in a locked room, strangled and stabbed with a letter opener bearing the Ashford crest." He paced slowly, his eyes scanning the guests. "The locked room. It is the first puzzle. The door locked with a unique key found inside. The window sealed. No secret passages, no hidden entrances. Yet a killer entered, killed and left. How? The answer lies in the timing. Madame Marlowe was strangled first, the marks on her throat clear, as Dr. Graham confirmed. The stabbing, it was post-mortem, a flourish, meant to mislead or to point to the Ashfords. Sir Reginald bristled. "Point to us? That sits preposterous, Poirot. That letter opener sits been in the family for generations." "Precisement," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. "Its presence, it suggests intimacy with this house. But let us move to the second crime, the theft of the Ashford sapphire from a locked safe. Only you, Sir Reginald, and Lady Beatrice knew the combination, yet the safe, it was unforced, the jewel gone. This suggests either a betrayal within the family or a deception." Clara Wentworth, her face still pale from the poisoning attempt, interjected. "And the poison in my coffee? Someone wanted me dead too, Monsieur Poirot." "Why?" Poirot turned to her, his expression grave. "Mademoiselle Wentworth, your survival. It was fortunate, but it tells us much. The cyanide. It was in your cup alone, added after the coffee was poured. A clumsy act. Unlike the precision of the murder, the killer. They grew desperate, fearing you knew what Madame Marlowe knew." Dr. Graham adjusted his spectacles nervously. But what did Evelyn know? She was always prying, yes, but enough to be killed for it. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Madame Marlowe. She was a collector of secrets. She knew of Lord Edmund's debts, of Mademoiselle Wentworth's father's bankruptcy, of your unfortunate patient, Doctor, and of a disputed will, Monsieur Crane. She also knew of Charles, Lady Beatrice's brother, who contested the Ashford estate and vanished to America, or so we were told. Lady Beatrice gasped. "Charles, you think he sets involved?" Poirot held up the singed envelope found in the servants' hall, the word Charles scrawled upon it. It suggests a connection, and the cigarette case found in the garden with Mademoiselle Wentworth's initials and a trace of Madame Marlowe's lipstick. It ties the crimes together. But how? He paused, letting the tension build. "Let us reconstruct. Madame Marlowe. She was killed because she uncovered a truth about the sapphire, perhaps, or about someone in this room. The burned paper in her fireplace, the slashed cushion, they suggest a search for something she held. The sapphire's theft. It was either the motive or a distraction. And the poison, it was meant to silence Mademoiselle Wentworth, who may have glimpsed the same truth." Crane, clutching his portfolio, spoke sharply. "This is speculation, Poirot. You accept no proof. My papers are confidential, and I accept done nothing wrong." Poirot, Sift's eyes gleamed. "Your papers, Monsieur Crane. They are indeed significant. Madame Marlowe hinted at a new will, one that threatened Mademoiselle Wentworth Sift's inheritance, and in the garden you argued with her, fearing she knew too much. But let us consider another clue. The lipstick." He produced Clara's cigarette case, its silver surface glinting. "This case? It bears Madame Marlowe's lipstick, yet Mademoiselle Wentworth claims she lost it. How did it end up in the garden, near a scuff mark by the fountain? Someone placed it there, to cast suspicion, or to cover their tracks. Fatal of Nadamu." Clara Sipp's eyes flashed. "I told you, I didn't go near Evelyn Nist's room. Someone took my case to frame me." Poirot nodded. "Possible, mademoiselle. But there is another possibility. The killer. They are clever, but they make mistakes. The poison. It was clumsy. The cigarette case. It was misplaced. And the envelope with Charles. It was not fully burned. These are the errors of a mind under pressure. It cur." He turned to Grayson, who stood by the door, his face impassive. "And you, Monsieur Grayson, you have served the Ashfords for 20 years. You know the Manor Sipp's secrets, its history. Did you know of Charles Sipp's claim, or of the sapphire Sipp's true value?" Grayson Sipp's composure flickered. "I know only what a butler should, sir. The sapphire is priceless, yes, but I set no part in its theft." Poirot's voice softened, but his eyes were relentless. "Berness, then let us consider the sequence. Madame Marlowe was killed at midnight, her door locked. The sapphire was taken before or after. The poison was administered this morning. And the cigarette case. It was found in the garden where Mademoiselle Wentworth and Monsieur Crane argued. These events, they point to one truth. The killer is among us, and their motive is rooted in the past. Inspector Lyle stepped forward. Monsieur Poirot, you stir circling the truth, but who sets the culprit? We sep no fingerprints, no clear evidence. Poirot smiled enigmatically. The evidence, Inspector, it is in the minds and hearts of those present. The little grey cells, they have seen the pattern. But one final piece remains, a revelation that will come, I assure you, before this day is done. The guests exchanged wary glances, their secrets laid bare, but the killer's identity still shrouded. Outside, the fog began to clear, as if Dunraven Manor itself awaited the final unveiling of its darkest truth. Chapter 13. The Twist of Truth. The drawing-room of Dunraven Manor was a stage set for revelation, its heavy curtains drawn back to admit the pale evening light that bathed the guests in a stark, unforgiving glow. Hercule Poirot stood at the centre, his compact figure commanding silence, his grey eyes gleaming with the triumph of a puzzle solved. The guests, Lady Beatrice Ashford, Sir Reginald Ashford, Clara Wentworth, Dr. Alistair Graham, Mr. Victor Crane, and the butler Grayson, sat in a tense semicircle, their faces etched with dread and anticipation. Inspector Lyle and his constables flanked the door, while Captain Hastings, seated near Poirot, leaned forward, his heart pounding with expectation. Messieurs et mesdames, Poirot began, his voice resonant with certainty. The crimes of Dunraven Manor, murder, theft, and attempted murder, they are no longer shadows. The little grey cells, they have worked tirelessly, and now Hercule Poirot will reveal the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Lady Beatrice, her hands trembling, whispered, "Please, Monsieur Poirot, end this nightmare. Who killed Evelyn?" Poirot raised a hand, his moustache twitching. "Patience, madame. To understand the killer, we must first understand the crimes. Let us begin with Madame Marlowe, strangled and stabbed in a locked room. The door, locked with a unique key, the window sealed, the letter opener, bearing the Ashford crest. The stabbing, it was post-mortem, a distraction, meant to point to the Ashfords or to obscure the true method." He paced slowly, his eyes sweeping the room. Then the Ashford sapphire, stolen from a locked safe known only to Sir Reginald and Lady Beatrice. The safe, unforced, suggests an insider. And finally, the cyanide in Mademoiselle Wentworth's coffee, a clumsy attempt to silence her, as she too knew something dangerous. Clear, her face pale but defiant, interjected, "Evelyn said she stead found something worth more than gold. I didn't stead know what, but someone thought I did." "Precisement," Poirot said, his gaze sharp. Madame Marlowe was a collector of secrets, Lord Edmund's debts, Mademoiselle Wentworth's inheritance, Dr. Graham's tragic patient, Monsieur Crane's disputed will, and the mysterious Charles, Lady Beatrice's brother. These secrets, they are the threads of our tapestry. But one thread, it shines brighter than the rest. He produced the singed envelope with the word Charles scrawled upon it. This, found in the servants' hall, was meant to be destroyed, like the paper in Madame Marlowe's fireplace. And the cigarette case, Mademoiselle Wentworth's, found in the garden with Madame Marlowe's lipstick, it was no accident. It was placed to mislead. Sir Reginald, his face flushed, growled, "Get to the point, Poirot. Who sits the killer?" Poirot turned to him, his eyes narrowing. "The point, Sir Reginald, is motive. Madame Marlowe uncovered a truth so dangerous it cost her life. The sapphire. It was not the motive, but a symbol of a legacy, contested, a betrayal concealed, and the killer. They are here, in this room. A gasp rippled through the guests. Poirot's gaze settled on Dr. Alistair Graham, whose spectacles slipped as he adjusted them nervously. "Doctor, you have been most quiet. Your patient, the one who died in London. An accident, you said. But Madame Marlowe, she knew otherwise. Did she not?" Graham Sipp's face paled. "I told you, it was cleared by the inquest. She had no proof." "No proof, perhaps," Poirot said, "but suspicion, and suspicion, it can ruin a man. You were anxious, Doctor, always checking your watch, as if time itself were your enemy. But let us consider another." He turned to Mr. Victor Crane, who clutched his portfolio tightly. "Monsieur Crane, your papers, they are not merely legal documents." And Madame Marlowe spoke of a new will, one that threatened Mademoiselle Wentworth's inheritance. You argued with her in the garden, fearing she knew too much. But your secret, it is deeper. "We?" Crane Tet's voice was sharp. "I done nothing wrong, Poirot. My work is confidential." "Confidential," Poirot repeated, "but not innocent. And now, the twist." He paused, his eyes locking onto Grayson, the butler who stood by the door, his face a mask of calm. "Monsieur Grayson, you have served the Ashfords for 20 years. You know their secrets, their scandals. You knew of Charles, Lady Beatrice's brother, who contested the estate and vanished. But he did not vanish, did he?" Grayson Sitt's composure cracked, his eyes widening. "I don't know what you mean, sir." "Oh, but you do," Poirot said, his voice like steel. "Charles Ashford did not go to America. He changed his name, his face, and returned as you, Grayson. The little grey cells, they see the pattern. Your knowledge of the manor, your access to the keys, your presence at every critical moment. You killed Madame Marlowe, who had met you in London under your old identity and began to suspect. You stole the sapphire, not for wealth, but to ruin the Ashfords as revenge for your disinheritance." The room erupted in gasps. Lady Beatrice cried out, "Grayson? Charles? It can be." Poirot held up the envelope. "This, with your name, was your mistake. You burned papers to hide your past. But this survived. The cigarette case you planted in the garden, using Madame Marlowe's lipstick to implicate Mademoiselle Wentworth. The poison you added to her coffee, fearing she knew your secret from Evelyn's hints, but the poison was weak, deliberately so, to cast suspicion elsewhere." Grayson Sitt's face twisted, his calm shattering. "You set no proof, Poirot. I just a butler." "Proof?" Poirot smiled. "The police, they will find your fingerprints on the cyanide vial, hidden in the servants' hall. The sapphire, I wager, is in your quarters, tucked inside a hollowed book. Your habit of lingering in the library betrayed you. And the letter opener, it was your final touch, a symbol of the family that cast you out." Grayson lunged for the door, but Lyle Sitt's constables seized him. Lady Beatrice sobbed, "Charles, why? We thought you were gone." "He was gone," Poirot said softly, "but vengeance brought him back. He served you, watched you, waited for his moment. Madame Marlowe Sitt's curiosity was his undoing." As Grayson was led away, shouting denials, Hastings shook his head. "Good Lord, Poirot, you done it again. Charles, all along, hiding as the butler. How did you know?" "The little grey cells," Hastings, Poirot said, his eyes twinkling. "They see what others miss, the silences, the glances, the weight of a past unburied. Inspector Lyle clapped Poirot on the shoulder. "Brilliant work, monsieur. The sapphire sitters likely where you said, and we sit and match those prints. Dunraven sits as safe now." As the guests dispersed, their relief palpable, Poirot gazed out at the clearing mist. "Safe, we," he murmured. "But the heart, it carries its scars. Come, Hastings, let us leave this manor to heal." And with that, Dunraven Manor's secrets were laid bare, its shadows banished by the light of Poirot's unerring logic.